So yeah, I'm Adamson. As you mentioned, my call is W7QO. Some of you around here may remember me when I was in E1H. I gave that up 3 or 4 years ago when I found a 7-land call. So I have to ask this question every time I've done this presentation. Who in here has their original ham call? Okay, that's actually pretty big. Who has vanity calls? I'm surprised. The mix is the other way. More than 50% have vanities and less than 50% have original calls. So yeah, I'm vanity like 4 or 5 times, although I got my ham license. My only claim to fame is I got my ham license, my extra, the last day the FCC ever gave an extra exam in the top of the building, what's it called, Rail, in the federal building in downtown Boston. And I had to go there. It was loud, it was noisy, it was in August in the summertime, and it was hot, no air conditioning, and I'd take 20 more minutes CW course class in there before they ever gave me the written ticket. So, for David and those guys that are advanced, I was advanced once too, but it was just too easy to go get an extra. So some of you might know I've given this presentation at North Fulton, I've given this presentation at ARC, I gave it at the new group over in Cumming at the Sarah group, as they call themselves. I've had a balloon in the air for about almost a year, 45 days short of a year, little less than 45 days actually. And so it's not hard to do. And in the next few minutes or so, I'll give you an idea about how we did it, what I did it with, and some of you in this room I'm sure will try it because it's actually not that hard. So what's funny about this is what started it all. Okay, it's kind of a natural. I'm going to skip past this little bit of an introduction, and I already got the about me done. What started this all was, who in here is playing with drones? Who's had one fly away, never to be found again? In the beginning of time, that was like the magic thing, right? You go buy a drone, you fly it, and all of a sudden it just decides to go away. And there was no way to understand it. Okay, so I have to stay on this side, but there's no way to understand where it went. They got smarter and smarter and smarter, and so I decided that there has to be a way to take APRS, make a little teeny board that you could attach to a drone, hook a battery or run the battery off the drone, whatever, and let it tell you where it was using APRS. So if I can get it apart. So who in here has played with Arduino? I mean, that has to be like the #1 ham tool, right? The Arduino environment. So the first thing I had to do is I couldn't do it on Arduino. Arduino is just like, I don't know, I have this thing about Arduino, right? So I had to take a little teeny ARM processor, and I built this board to basically be an Arduino Mini compatible board. It's right here in my hand. And it has a serial port on it so I could interface a GPS. But I didn't have a radio. And radios, when I did this about 3 years ago, were kind of hard to figure out because analog devices had this chip and it was like really complex and it needed like 50 parts around it to make it work and 4 different power supplies. There had to be something easier. Just get here for a second. And so, as it turns out, Silicon Laboratories, they call themselves Scilab, has one little part. It needs 7 parts around it, and you have a complete radio that's frequency agile from 142 megahertz to over a gigahertz. And all you have to do is basically tune the output filter on it as a low-pass filter for wherever you want the frequency to stop. And in my case, I stopped at like 165 megahertz because I was only interested in APRS. And it actually, you talk to it through a little microcontroller, and it will work in CW mode, which was perfect for what I wanted. So my next challenge was, well, how do I make FM? Well, how do you make FM, right? You modulate the local oscillator. If you try to do it anywhere else, all you're doing is voice over sideband. So I managed to figure out how to take a small little, what's called a VCXO, a voltage control oscillator, and with the pin on the processor, modulate the VCXO, and out comes FM. And depending on how you modulate that, or what level you modulate that, you can adjust the deviation. So I basically had the building parts to make myself an APRS tracker in roughly the size of a couple of quarters stacked end to end, and I sandwiched the board together and I flew it on the drone. And that became sort of the first thing that got me started into this. But I did it the hardest way possible. I brought that ARM processor up in what they call bare metal mode, so I didn't have any libraries, I didn't have anything, so I had to talk natively to the hardware. But it taught me a lot about what I was doing. So let me just segue from that to talk about balloons. Who in here has launched a high altitude balloon? A latex one is usually what they use. A couple guys around here. There used to be a pretty active group in North Atlanta that did it, but I haven't seen them launch one for a really long time. West Virginia. Yeah, how high did they go?
Which one?
Yeah, pick your highest.
We went over 100,000.
Over 100,000, pretty typical. How big was the balloon? Do you remember? Like 4, 5, 6 feet? You expected it to get that big when it burst? Yeah, usually they're a lot smaller when you're launching. So only a few people. I'm kind of surprised. There's a group up in North Fulton that does it. Not very often, but when they do, they tend to make a big noise about doing it. Anybody tried just taking a regular old party balloon and, attaching something on it and see where it goes? Yeah. So that's what I decided to do, right? So let's talk about 2 different kinds of balloons. The kind where they go to 100,000 feet, they're what I call the up and down flights, right? They're over in about 3 hours. You fill them up, they start out about 4 feet in diameter, they go up to 6, 7, 8, 9, depending on how big. As the gas is expanding, the latex can't constrain it, they burst, out comes a little parachute, comes down, it's usually over in 3 or 4 hours, and basically it's a big fox hunt, right at the end. Where did it go? Who's going to find it? How are you going to find it? Those kinds of things. Almost everybody today uses APRS to do that, because luckily in the United States, we have a really good APRS network. So the chances of it being heard by a digipeater somewhere is actually pretty great, and the likelihood of recovery is actually pretty good as well. The other side of ballooning is something called a floating balloon. They never use latex. They always use some form of plastic to constrain the lifting gas, okay? And it's really as simple. You can buy these on Amazon all day long. It's a 3-foot party balloon. But in this case, it's metallized because you want something that will basically stop the lifting gas, and you can use helium or hydrogen. Hydrogen is always kind of fun. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the tricks with these are, you don't fill them like you fill latex. When I fly one of these, it has about, that much gas in it. Only about a quarter of that is filled. Because what you're expecting is for this to go up, that gas to expand, to take up the rest of the volume, and as it expands, at the point in time where the pressures equalize internal and outside, it's at what's called superpressure, and you want it then to stay there. And it's not untypical, it was when I started, but it's not untypical for people to fly these around the world. But there's some tricks to that. And the big trick is, they're fire and forget. So you're going to let one go, you're never going to get it back again unless you got really lucky, which I don't know anybody who has. And you have to come up with something that can withstand the environment. Think about it, it's going to go up, that size of balloon is going to go to about 11,000 meters, which is roughly about 35,000 feet. It's cold up there. It's like minus 30 to minus 40 probably at that temperature in the summertime. So batteries become a real problem. There's very few chemistries of batteries that survive those kinds of temperatures over any duration of time. How are you going to, that's a long duration flight. You're expecting it to last multiple days. So how are you going to keep a battery going for that period of time, keep the weight really low because you don't have a lot of lift in a balloon of this size? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So those are some of the sort of the hard parts that you have to deal with, right? Okay, so let's talk about the 2 kind of critical numbers that you need to understand. They're not really numbers, but just what you need to understand. You have free lift, which is the amount of weight that the balloon can lift over above anything that's attached to it. So it's really the weight of the balloon, the weight of the lifting gas, the weight of everything attached to it, and how much more can you lift over and above that. Anybody guess how much free lift this flight would have had?
8 ounces?
A lot slower. Anybody else?
2.
Lots slower.
1 ounce.
Lots lower. How about 2.5 grams of free lift is what this is. So if you flew, and I'll show you the first thing I flew, this board right here, you probably can't see it from right there, but I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. If you flew this board, well, I told you, I got the picture, I didn't realize it was on there. If you flew this board right here, you would take something lighter than bird poop. Is how many grams of free lift you have. And here's the reality, if a bird pooped on it when it's flying, it's coming down. That's how little free lift you have over and above the weight of this payload. And when I flew this payload, the whole payload, I'll talk about what all was on here in a few minutes, weighed 24 grams. So I had 2.5 to 3 grams of free lift over and above, all the rest of the weights. And that was my very, very first flight. There was a question back there?
That was just your partial inflation?
Yes,
okay.
So that is, once you fill the balloon to the point where you can lift all of its weight and what it's attached to, plus 2.5 grams, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So, now that's the board, and I talked about it really quick. It's a low-power ARM processor, frequency agile, makes APRS tones. The board that I flew had solar, so this board is powered by 2 little teeny solar panels that I hung off the side of it. You can see them right there. This board, and then a small, very lightweight lithium polymer battery. But didn't work very good because lithium polymers really hate really cold weather. And so sometimes it would stop at night if it got really cold, and other times it wouldn't. And I had to basically come up with the code so that I could detect this low energy state that it was going into and shut down the demand of current that was drawn on the battery so that I could keep the thing running for as long as possible. Flew at 25 to 28,000, the whole total weight of it was 25 grams. But the big thing I learned, because I flew in this time of the year, was if you don't have lightning protection or ESD protection on that board, it's not going to last very long. All it has to do is fly next to a thunderstorm, and because of the static that's emanating off that cloud, it's going to take out some portion of it. And I had so many flights that would be just running along perfect, poof, gone. Never to be heard again, and they happened to always be around a thunderstorm. So here was launch day. See the board on the left? You probably can't tell, but that's free lift right there. I have the tracker, the string, the balloon, and you can kind of see that blob in the middle. It's a piece of clay that I measured out to 2.5 grams. So when I had the whole thing together, I could let go of it. And if it hovered, I was at perfect 2.5 grams of free lift. Then you pull the 2.5 grams off, take it wherever you're going to go, and let go of it. That's what you can hear. You can see the balloon's only about a quarter full. And as it flies away, it's pretty floppy and limpy, and it just takes forever to go up. This flight, and there's a collage my wife put together there, the balloon's continuing on, but this flight was kind of interesting. Come back to that, okay, get to that slide in a second. It started out, we flew it out of the park and ride up by Walmart up off of Hamilton Mill on a Saturday morning, and it was kind of blowy and windy. When we started, another learning is you don't want to do this in very much wind because there's that much free lift, they tend to go that way instead of that way. And so I let go of it, and I kind of let the balloon go, and then there was a little bit of slack in the line, I let go of it, and it swung down, shattered the solar panels on the ground. How I managed to catch it, I have no idea. I grabbed it, we ran back home, I soldered new solar panels on it, we came back about a half an hour, 45 minutes later, and I was bound determined to fly this thing. And we flew it again, only this time I kind of ran along with it until it lifted out of my hands. So it continued on for a while, and it took forever, right? It circled around here, went up over the top of Atlanta, headed up towards the northwest corner. And as you all know, this time of year, the thunderstorms come in from Alabama in the afternoon, right? Well, sure enough, that's what was happening. So I'm like, well, get far enough north, The sun was starting to go down. The first time I didn't know what was going to happen with batteries or anything else. It had made it to super pressure altitude, so it was about 28,000 feet. And it was kind of flying alongside of this big thunderstorm. And I was hoping that all of that convective action would create enough currents that would maybe buffer it away a little bit till it got around it. Well, sure enough, it started to come down. And it didn't take very much moisture for it to collect for it to come down. And any form of humidity would have collected that moisture as well. So it started to come down, it started to get dark, and we watched it descend over Fort Payne. And it went over Fort Payne, it got down around about 200 or 300 feet. Luckily, APRS was really good in the area, so I watched it descend all the way down. I thought, that's it, tomorrow I'm going to go get it, and I'm going to bring it back, and we're going to fly it again. So we went to bed about midnight after it kind of reported us last time, went away, and we didn't hear about it, so we went to bed. I knew right where it wasn't going to be hard to go get. And I was going to get up the next morning and go get it. So I got up about 7 o'clock, and my wife had her tablet. She picked it up off the nightstand table, and she didn't have her glasses on, so she's kind of looking at it, and I'm like, oh, where is it? Still in the same place as it been heard from? Figuring that it had not. She's like, I can't tell if it says 2,400 or 24,000. And I'm like, why give me that? So she gives me her tablet, and it was a 24,000 over Kentucky. So what had happened is it had got moisture from that storm, it had come down, it had landed, sort of didn't get caught on anything, whatever, dried out, took off again, and the next day it was headed up over Kentucky. And we watched it for the rest of that day into the next night, and then the next day a big storm up over Pennsylvania got it, and that was the end of that. So that was kind of my first flight, and it was pretty easy. I just took one of these and hooked it all up, and away we went. But a couple things came out of that was really key. The little tracker board had to be ultra light. 24 grams and 25,000 feet wasn't going to cut it. Not around here with the thunderstorms that can go up to 50. So I needed a better controller, and so I decided, a friend of mine challenged me, said, can you make one in less than a square inch? And I don't know, this one's quite a ways away from a square inch. It's probably like 4 or 5 square inches, right? So you won't be able to see this, but I'll leave it up and you can come see it later. The board that's flying around the world right now is this board. It weighs less than an ounce. It's less than a square inch of space. It has power supply, solar charger, 2 radios, and I'll get to that in a minute, GPS and the processor, and the GPS antenna all on this board. And it's all, unfortunately, for those who know, 0402 components, and I hand make them, and that's a real problem because my eyes aren't nearly as good as they used to be. A couple things came out from after I kind of did a couple more flights than the first one, is that there are parts of the world where they don't allow you to transmit APRS. North Korea is obviously one of them, right? The second one is the UK has a real stringent rule about no airborne ham radio, is how they come. So I needed a way to basically turn off the radio when I was over geography. Well, I had a GPS, so for anybody who's messed with that kind of stuff, you can create what's called a geofence. And when I'm inside of these particular fences, and I mapped out, I don't know, 60 or 80 different geographies and their borders and everything, then I don't transmit. So I created one over Northern Ireland and New England to lock out so I don't transmit there. But the other thing is that APRS only covers 5% of the world. So everybody who had tried flying one of these that would use the APRS, great in the US, great in Eastern Europe, but you get past that, nothing. So for better than 2/3 of the globe, you don't know where it is, what it's doing or anything else. You might get lucky if you fly over the right thing in Russia to be heard, but the chances are pretty slim. So I looked for a better way for this to phone home, basically. Who in here has played with Whisper? Few people, question, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, does the board have the ability to store waypoints, and then when you get out of the geofence, and then...
Does, yeah.
Okay.
And to try to do that over APRS is a little bit of a problem, but yeah, it stores a log and then plays it back, and I recover that, and it'll plot with plots. But okay, for those that have played with Whisper in the room, you probably know 2 things. It's an incredibly strict format to the message. It's 11 characters of data. It takes 110 seconds to send 1 packet. And you do it every 2 minutes at exactly 1 second after the top of the 2-minute interval. And if you miss, if you're off by 10 seconds one way or the other, nobody hears you. Because everybody's keyed to listen at exactly 1 second after the 2-minute cycle. Right? And it's always on the even minutes. Well, luckily I had everything on board to determine that. GPS can create 1 pulse per second. GPS has time. So now my problem was, okay, well, whisper 11 characters. It's pretty hard to get solar voltage, battery voltage, altitude, position. I don't know, there's like 6 or 8 different pieces of information that I encoded in a whisper packet. So we had to come up with a protocol that we could sort of fit over the top of Whisper, and luckily there's a few of us in the world that are messing with this, and so some people smarter than me figured out that part of it. And we end up using 2 Whisper frames back to back. The first one looks just like a regular Whisper one, so it has my call sign in it, my grid square at 4 digits, and instead of putting out the output power, which is what the last byte is, I put out the altitude in thousands of meters. And then the second Whisper frame that I put out, I retasked most all of that except for the grid square. So the first 6 characters, which are the call sign, we found that 2 positions that we could use a Q and the numbers 0 through 9 in 2 positions, and it didn't mess up anybody else's Whisper. And luckily there are no places in the world that use a Q as the first letter of the call sign anymore. There used to be, but there isn't today. So we retasked that in order to create a Whisper environment so that we could fly with it and get telemetry so that we knew where we were. And the best I can do with Whisper is a 6-digit grid square, which is roughly a 2.5 by 2.5 mile square block. So I know that the balloon's in that area. But what it did, and I'll show you in just a minute, is it basically gave me worldwide coverage. So now I know where the balloon is, no matter where it is in the world. There's a couple places that it gets pretty tough to be heard in, but for the most part, the one that I've got up right now is reported every day except for 4 in its whole life, and it's almost a year old. The second thing I learned was, go ahead, John.
What did you use for an antenna for Whisper?
Yeah, so I'm on 20 meters, and I'm using a half-wave dipole on 20 meters. So I literally have 10 meters up one way, 5 meters up one way and 5 meters down the other way. So yeah, it's a little teeny 36 gauge magnet wire that on both sides of that leg, and I'll show you what that ended up weighing, because I'm sure you guys are going to use what all that weigh in a minute. The second thing that we learned is there's no way you can do it on a party balloon. You can, but what they're doing now is they're taking 2 of them, connecting them together, and then flying the payload underneath that, but they're still stuck with this 2 to 5 grams of free lift is all. So what I'm flying and what I've flown most all of my around the world with is, anybody want to guess what material this is? It's not special balloon material. Nope, it's not mylar. You know what? This is sushi wrapping film. You laugh, I'm dead serious. Think about it. Sushi sits in a cooler or in a display rack for all day, and they don't want it to absorb the environment or, exude the environment, whichever the case might be. So literally, there's a company in Japan that makes this film. It's primarily used in the food industry for wrapping food, and it's exactly for that reason, because it doesn't permeate at all. In the film that we use, it has a glue, polyethylene backing on one side that's heat sealable. So you can't really get this one out all the way. It's 7.5 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. And that's the widest you can get the film is 3.5 foot wide. And this whole balloon weighs about 100 grams, just like this, about 105 actually. And you fill this, but as opposed to 2 to 3 grams of free lift, I get to go to 15. That means 2 birds could poop on it and it would still stay up. Question way back?
So, odd question is, have you noticed the difference between the elliptical balloon and the spherical balloon as far as capabilities?
So, yes and no. It's kind of an involved question, but it goes something like this. The problem with the round ones are, because they have that metallized film on them, they heat up during the day, and that means they rise in altitude. At night, when that solar is not there, they cool and they descend. So the round foil-covered ones tend to go through this, what they call diurnal effect, of rapid cool and rapid heat up, morning and night. And that tends to work the film to the point where you get little pinholes on the edges because it's gone through that expansion and contraction so many times. So we went to a clear film that minimized that. I won't say it completely did away with it because it still heats up during the day and it still cools at night. But the altitude difference, the pressure difference is much less. And that's one thing. The second is I can put so much more volume, I should say it this way. There's so much area in that capsule-shaped form that can lift, whereas I'm much constrained in a round form. The most perfect shape is a pumpkin. If you could build the perfect balloon, it would be a pumpkin. NASA did a whole lot of studies back in the 60s to determine that was the perfect shape. They flew squares, they flew triangles, they flew rectangles, they flew anything and everything to try to determine that. And the reason why the pumpkin is so perfect is because it's a constant pressure no matter where you are, both from the internal gas trying to push out and the external atmosphere push in. So it's the best thing for trying to maintain pressure. Anybody want to guess, if I doubled the length of that balloon, what advantage is there? 0. The reason why is because I just doubled the weight from 100 grams to 200 grams, and all I did by doubling the inside volume in that dimension was put more lifting gas in to lift the extra 100 grams. The altitude would be exactly the same. But the only way I could actually get higher altitude is if I go volumetric in width. Then the volume really starts to incrementally or geometrically change to the point where it can lift more. So the company's now making that balloon, a friend of mine in California. It's about a half a cubic meter in volume. All of my radios are only putting out 10 milliwatts. They're capable of doing 100. But what we found is that 10 milliwatts easily on APRS travels 500 kilometers. So why go anything more? So I have to give the Whisper guys a hard time because they're always like, oh, I work, this and this on a watt. And I said, I work it on 10 milliwatts. So it's amazing what Whisper can do because it's so, and if you guys are going to have your digital conversation in a few weeks, you'll learn all about this, but it so strongly has an FEC component, a forward error correction component in it. You can miss half of the packet, literally, and it will still recover and give you all the information that's in it. So that's one of the advantages to Whisper. So the first day I launched one of these, I have a story to tell about that too. I had a whole bunch of friends that were helping, obviously. That's the little tracker laying in a little bed of shredded paper because I had to move it from my house with solar panels on it and everything else. I didn't want the solar panels to break. We flew, we talked the question about, I'm sorry, was there a question back there? Yeah, that's the little tracker on the top of it. We flew it on a double length. My friends in California were all, I have a bunch of PhD friends in California, they're like, it's going to go to like 60,000 feet. I'm like, it's not, guarantee it's not. So they made me a special balloon, sent it to me, and I was going to fly it because I was going to prove to them it didn't. So you'll see that that's really the 15-foot one, not the 7.5. But it's 3.5 feet wide, and it went to 48,000 feet, which is right exactly where I predicted that it would. That's the little bitty tracker getting famous by Peter. Some of you guys know him for IP. That's Peter right there. Taking pictures of it. And that's Mo Wheatley, for those who don't know, on the left. So, took off out of Atlanta. First day I flew one of these. It didn't go above 10,000 feet. Like, what is going on? What did I do wrong? That was my first question, right? But it just stayed at 10. It would go to 10, it would go to 11, it would go to 12, and I was expecting it to go to 40 to 45. And it didn't. And it stayed at that 10,000 foot mark, just kind of hopping along all the way until it got to the North Carolina shore. And you'll see on the left, that's kind of the track that it went. And what happened is, didn't realize this until after the fact. We had a storm come through the day before, that it got really, really humid. And we had this humidity layer at exactly 10,000 feet. So it would go up to 10,000, pick up enough moisture, come back down, dry out, and it did that cycle all the way till it got to the coast. As soon as it got to the coast, started up, continued up, went to 40,000 feet, sun went down. I didn't know if I'd ever hear it again. But here it was just between the US and Bermuda. And you can see this is the whisper track. Every 10 minutes, it sends 2 whisper frames. And it's actually pretty decent to track a moving object with if you don't need really, really good accuracy. So that was day 1, day 2, and it was supposed to be 4 days to cross over to Europe. Well, you don't show up, but it got stuck over basically the Canary Islands for a week. But it went away. After day 2, never heard from it. I'm like, what happened? Then it came back on like day 7, and it was over the Canaries. And then for the next, you see it rocket. You can see where it stopped transmitting over the UK. That's the geofence, right? And then it rocketed all the way up over Norway and down into northern Europe. And it made a little loop right here over Germany. And then it, here's the loop, and then it continued across. So, no battery. I didn't fly any battery on purpose. I fly a little team capacitor. So I expect it to run on solar during the day and for it to shut off at night. That was designed, because no way was I going to get a battery to live at minus 60 C. And that's where it's living at 45,000 feet. So you can see all the days. Here's a day, here's a day, here's a day, here's a day, here's a day. This is all APRS coverage here. And then this is my second little story. Anybody ever taken FlightAware or any of those Flight Radar 24 things and looked at, airplanes flying and where they are? You probably haven't looked much at Europe, but I look at that thing all the time when I'm launching the balloon, right? So right through here, from Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, all of these countries, they all make the path to Europe right across Turkey into Europe. And here I was at the end of the day, on whatever day it was, getting ready to cross over this incredibly busy corridor that's probably about 20 miles wide. And airplanes over there, they let them go to 41,000 feet. It's routine that you see them at 41. Over here, you don't see them usually that high. Above 43, you usually don't see them at all. But over there, in that corridor, they're almost all at 41 going one way, 39 to 40 going the other way. And I had to cross over that at night, and the sun went down. I didn't know, but obviously it didn't get hurt the next day. Now, do I think it got hit by an airplane? No. But if it got close enough that it got wrapped in a vortex coming off of a wing, it would have just rolled itself in a little ball, and it was definitely coming down. So I had to get them higher, and that was a helium flight. The difference between helium and hydrogen is good for about 1,000 meters. And I really needed that 1,000 meters. So the next flight I flew was a hydrogen flight. This one flew with my wife's call sign on it because I actually had one with my call sign. And a limitation of the way we did the protocol was you couldn't have 2 balloons on Whisper at the same time with the same call sign. We fixed that since, but at the time we couldn't. So we flew out of the U.S. on 822. And again, the same thing, it was her call sign, a higher F-3 on APRS, I always use the W, higher FW-3 would have been the Whisper one. It flew for 277 days. Went through some crazy weather. I don't know if you noticed this right here, but here's the equator. It came down right here. It had to deal with this front that came through. It managed to make it through that. There it is being listened to by all the Whisper stations. On a picture up there, but anyway, finally a storm got it off of the, what do they call that? This part of Africa. I can't think of what they call that. Ivory Coast. Thank you. A storm came off of there, which is not untypical for this time of year. About 50,000 feet worth of storm, and we watched it. I think I have a picture of that. We watched it sort of die and descend. You can't see from here. That was actually the one when it was pretty high, but it went down to 3,000 meters, and I knew it was headed down. It tried to come back up a few times, but it just wasn't able to overpower that storm. Once it gets down below, the atmosphere starts to get more dense, so the humidity layer starts to rise, and you sort of end up in this runaway train thing, and you just can't get over. But this balloon, it did hold. It's now not the holder anymore. We beat all of Google's records. Google Loon, which some of you know about, held all of the records. Those were all commercial flight records, except for one that I'll talk to you about in a minute. But, so we traveled more than 190 days, we traveled more than 122,000 kilometers, we went faster than 182 knots. I beat only two I couldn't beat was I couldn't generate more power than them, because they have big, huge solar cells, and I had these little teeny ones, right? And I couldn't compete with their altitude. They're at 20,000 meters, and I'm at 14. So, but we survived lower than minus 83 C temperatures, and I have a picture, and it doesn't make it into this presentation, where it was heard. Her balloon was heard by 5 major continents all at the same time: Australia, China, the U.S., Japan, South America, all at the same time when it was over in the Pacific. So, I guess to manage expectations, there's parts of this that are hard, but just like anything else, you learn little bits and pieces as you go along. And we learned we could utilize whisper, for example. But here's the really funny part of it: when you do this, you take the balloon. And this is what I tell people when they want to do it. You take the balloon, and I ask them to reach in their pocket and give me a $100 bill. Then we're going to tie it on a little string, and we're going to let it go. I mean, in some ways, $100 is pretty cheap entertainment for almost a year. But if you think about it, that's really what it takes. And in my case, I designed all of my own hardware. Just to walk you through some of the hardware that's up here, and you'll get a chance to see it. I worked for a company that got bought by Apple 2 years ago, I guess. And we flew a bunch of balloons around the world with Apple. Actually, they were looking at using it to do imaging. And so we flew, this one uses an Iridium modem to talk back. So we had full control basically. I could command it to do things, and we actually had a little blower on it, because there's a theory that says if you put a balloon in a balloon and you blow outside air into the inside balloon, it will cause the balloon to descend. If you vacuum that air out, it will cause the balloon to rise. So you can basically have a form of altitude control if you want to steer it. So we did all that on this board, but it was used big batteries and had heaters on board and everything else to control that. And the last one I'll talk to you about a little bit later. So that leads me to my current balloon, the last of the 3 that I flew at the time. I haven't launched any since because I wanted to see what was going to happen. Remember me talking to you about the balloon that would go away for 7 days and wouldn't come back? The balloon that Mary Ellen flew would be the same thing. It would go away for months. I think the longest time was 8 weeks. We didn't hear from it, and all of a sudden it showed back up again one day. So I knew that there was a problem, and it was always when it had worked the day before, and then it had gone dark. And if you think about it, when solar comes up in the morning, those solar cells are sitting flat like this. Depending on where the sun is, it's getting different sort of angles of sunlight. So the ramp of power is really slow, and it has a whole bunch of noise on it. What would happen with this particular processor that I'm using, the only way I found this was because there were some other people that used it in a commercial market, and they had exactly the same problem, is that it would go up to a point, and if the power dropped, you would literally lock the processor completely. The hardware watchdog wouldn't even reset it. So I would have to wait until some magic combination of sunlight, until it would get past that point in time, then it would work that day. And sometimes that would work for maybe a week, and then it would stop working. So when I kind of figured out what happened, I took they make these little teeny parts called CPU supervisors, for anybody who's messed with them. They basically look for a particular voltage level. They hold the processor and reset until you get above that level, then they let the processor run. If you drop below that level, they hold the processor back and reset. And there's a bit of hysteresis that they design into the part so it can tolerate some noise. So I put one of those on dash 6, and it has never, with the exception of 4 days, it has never not phoned home in the 321 days that it's been launched. And those 4 days, 3 of them are legitimate. The 4th one it was heard, but because I rely on 2 different whisper position reports to get my full telemetry, if I only get the 2nd one, I didn't get the 1st, I never plotted on the map. So I can go back in my database and I can look and see that those records are there, but I never heard the 1st one, so it never showed up that day on any form of map. this is old actually, so let me give you the current numbers here. It's gone 890,000 kilometers in distance. And for anybody who's curious, that's to the moon and back, in equivalent distance. It's gone 20 laps around the U.S. It's gone 321 days. And I get a chance, I'll update this slide. And it's been only not been heard those three times, 4 if you really plot it on the map. So, and you can see there's a public available mapping site where you can look at all the balloons that are flying over the U.S. Anywhere in the world actually at any moment's time. And if there are multiple long duration ones that you can put them in, I'm looking at all of the database entries that they have in their database. So that's all, in this case it was 18 going on 19. If you count those, you'll see all 18 circumnavigations from that particular balloon. It was only at minus 30 at that point in time when I clicked on that, but usually it's running at minus 60 C, which makes it kind of hard to deal with batteries. So where does this all lead us to? Somewhere here I have this point. A friend of mine decided that he wanted to take the same challenge that I did with less than a square inch. This was mine. And he decided he was going to make one. And you probably can't see it, but it's about the size of a quarter that's in my hand. Same thing. It's got a single radio on it, but in this case that radio can do both VHF and HF. Solar, power supply, and everything else on it. And he decided to Arduino his. So it comes with this little daughter board that when you plug them together, you can plug a USB into this and you can talk to this board like it's an Arduino, and you can use the Arduino environment to program it. And we've just about got these ready to fly now finally. Here's the GPS module here, 2 power supplies, a little teeny processor in the middle. So it's pretty easy to do. You know, if somebody asks me, what does this board cost? It's probably about $20 in parts maybe. And it's a single-sided board, it's only 2 layers. So it's not really that complex to try to make, other than hand soldering 0402s. But so I think Peter's planning to make those available. I don't know what he's going to charge for them or anything of the specifics, but for those people who might want to try this, just remember to get your $100 bill out, put it on, and do that. That's where it is. It's 256K flash, 32K RAM, GPS with 1 pulse per second. The GPS has 50,000 kilometer altitude support in it. Solar and battery power supplies. You'll be able to talk to it either from PWM or DAC for those techies in the room. There's a way, all these processors have a built-in digital analog converter in them, so you can talk to them directly that way. And his USB serial port's built into this little adapter board. You don't fly that portion, you only fly this portion of it. So. And you can use it for other things too, obviously. So big thing in this year's, in a few weeks, the eclipse. And I bet you're going to see and hear a few people around here that launch balloons, because everybody's trying to launch a balloon, get pictures, see what the imagery's like of a balloon at 100,000 feet in the middle of the eclipse. The pictures from up there are pretty stunning for those who haven't seen it, because once you get up out of the haze layer and the atmosphere, everything's crystal clear. And try to find the moon. You always see these pictures like, oh look, I caught the moon in the picture, or I caught an airplane, or whatever. I've seen some pretty creative photography come off of that stuff. Here's the simple formula if you decide to do it, right? Amazon.com is your friend. You can get one of these. Or you can buy them in 5-packs for like $7 or something. It'd be pretty easy even if you didn't want to build one to come up with this, because you can buy most all the parts, the little Arduino processor, the little GPS, the little power supply to do solar and all those kinds of things. So you come with a tracker that's about 25 grams. Fill the balloon with 3 grams of free lift. Now just get out your clay and measure it, 3 grams. Attach it to your string. Everything when it hovers, you're at 3 grams. Hook 100 inches of tether onto the balloon, and you're going to expect between 24 and 28,000. If you double the balloons and use 2 of these, and that same basic formula, you're going to get to about 30,000 feet. And if you do solar on there, I mean, I have a friend of mine in New York who's flown 2 around the world on 2 of these balloons using that exact board right there. So it was 20 to 25 grams of weight to get in 2 of these balloons, and he's put them around the world. I won't say consistently, but it gets done rather routinely. So remember, when you do all the weight, when you're weighing that out, you got to subtract all of the tape and stuff that you might use to hold things together, because you're trying to get just the weight of the balloon, plus the lifting gas, plus the tether, plus the payload, and 2.5 grams greater than that. So I'll publish this at the end so you have these resources. In fact, I'm just going to jump over here and show you. So, I'll tell you, it was heard 8 seconds ago. So, my Dash 6 balloon, this is the 4th crossing of the equator that it's made in its life. That's the last day where it was all sleeping up here earlier. It's in a little bit of a turn down here around Papua New Guinea, and it might as well fly to Australia, because if you look at where it's going, balloons are doing nothing at that altitude right now. So this site that's online that I'm using right now is a publicly available site. You can overlay on top of it weather, you can overlay on top of it wind predictions, and it uses your last known altitude for those wind predictions. So all of these little Hydra fingers that you see here, I could click on any of these beads and it would tell me, but if I remember right, the green one is about 500 feet above, the blue is 500 feet below, and the red's about whatever altitude is predicted. Now, because of the whisper protocol that I use, I can't predict really precise things because I had such a constrained amount of characters. So my altitude is only ever good to 111 meters, and it's always rounded down. So it could be anywhere above, you can't see it, but it's saying that it is at 14,332 meters. It will be above that. It can be anywhere in the next 111 meters above that, and I'd still report 14,332. These tend to be 4-day strings, so you can see it's not going anywhere soon for the next 4 days, short of doing the crossover on the equator. So you can't see it, but over here on the left, and I can't figure out how to move the screen around, I report position, altitude, battery voltage, or in this case, supercap voltage, number of satellites that it's hearing, the voltage that it has on the solar panels, what the temperature is, and then obviously its position and speed and course. So all of those I managed to squish into that, what ends up being 22 characters of whisper data over the course of 4 minutes, because it gets transmitted in 2-minute sessions back to back. I had to write all the back end because Whisper doesn't have an interface to APRS. So I have to go take the Whisper database, look for my call sign, or my telemetry call sign, and then glue those back together, push them to APRS. This particular site relies on APRS data for it to track balloons. And if we go look, if I go take my specific flight, let's see if I can drive here, out of the search, and we look at everything that's flying in the world, you'll see that there's quite a number of balloons making their treks at various places. Now some of those, well, all of those have been heard in the last day, and some of them are just weather balloons that the local, a lot of the European countries team up with ham radio guys to rebroadcast the sonogram information from the weather balloons over APRS so people can track it. So a lot of those in Europe are that. This one in particular down here in Turkey is. This is a ham radio guy out of Canada that I know, and U3S16 is the same guy. He's been trying to do this on the real cheap. He wants basically a tracker that's $5. Well, the GPS, it's kind of hard to do because cheapest you can find a GPS module is about $5. So this is probably going to be somewhere in the order of $10 to $15, and then with the balloon at $5, he's going to be around $20, $25 to fly a whole flight. He's got one around the world, but he's had a lot of failures because he's using a GPS that once he gets above 10,000 meters, it quits reporting. I think he's finally fixed that problem, but That's the problem that he's had. Then you can see over here, this chart gives you basically the altitude profile. This is everything. This is latex, this is floaters, everything's up there. And some of the stuff's in my resources. They've done a really good job to group out of the UK because you can overlay, like if I go over here, for example, and I say, well, I have one in the US, so what's the weather doing over the US? And I tend to use the infrared one, but so you can see the clouds where it is. And there's another one that shows you cloud tops, so you can figure out if you're in the weather what's going to happen.
So I noticed you've got North America and Europe and Northern Africa. Do you find that the weather balloons tend to kind of travel in the same corridors?
Well, so here's what's funny, and I'll show you, and this was kind of an interesting learning after the fact. Let me just pull up my balloon and I'll turn on everything, and let me zoom out. See if we can get everything to refresh. Okay, so there's my 20 trips around the world, right? You can pretty much see it. I have to go out a little bit further for you to see the whole world completely. Okay, so there's Africa to Africa. Here's what's interesting that we found. To get my bearing. See this place right here, where everything tends to constrict together? The winds, for whatever the reason, in that part of the world at 46,000 feet, all predominantly are what you'd expect west to east, but they always draw everything.
That's where all the hurricanes end up.
Yeah, so they pull everything in right there. You'll see a similar thing over here, kind of in the middle of China towards, the Asian coast. Once we get out here into this area, they tend to spread back out. In fact, short of this path right here, which I'm trying to remember, I think this last, so I got stuck down here in the Caribbean for like a month. Well, not a bad place to get stuck, but the wrong time of the year to get stuck there, right? Just a few weeks ago. And then all of a sudden it just rocketed up the east coast of the US. It took less than 24 hours to go from here to here. And I thought, great, I'm going to get back up north because I'd been hanging out down here in this lower area. All those storms were coming off the coast of Africa, and I was dodging those. And then, to make matters worse, you heard about Typhoon Nora just a couple, within the last week, right? Here I was right in the middle of the Philippine Sea, and was at one time Super Typhoon Nora, right? Luckily, hurricanes aren't so bad. They tend to not be very tall, so I can probably pretty much fly over the top of those. But the wind fields around them get to be real interesting. But long story short, I rocketed up here, and I thought, yes, I'm going to go back north for a while. And I was looking forward to that, because then you pretty much get better winds up there. And then it came right back down around here, and it went down here, and it ended up right back in the Caribbean like a week later.
Are any of those hitting a jet stream? And
Yeah.
what notable speeds would you see?
So you'll see about 250 knots when you're in the jet stream, and you'll see this sort of bit of turbulence, because what happens is the balloon penetrates into the bottom of it tends to go forward, and it doesn't literally happen that way, but you'll see a big sort of gross variation in your reporting. Sometimes I'll see big dips. You'll see the little teeny chart up there in the left-hand corner. I don't know if you can see a little teeny blue line next to the W6, right? That's its altitude over its life. Now, remember, that's almost a year. But you'll see those big peaks. Some of those big peaks aren't real, but they're because the GPS got disturbed. It either went through or came out of the jet stream. And it could, it was traveling too fast or whatever, it got a bad GPS read. So occasionally that's bad.
So do you have friends who, like, Australia or the tip of South America? I mean, what would happen if you launched it closer to the pole? Would it eventually find its way into that?
So what's funny is it depends on the time of year. In Mary Ellen's, for example, it stayed north its whole life. I mean, literally, I said we didn't hear from it for months at a time. It's because it was in the middle of the winter and it was above the sun line. So it was up there hovering around having a party in the North Pole. I don't know if it was heard or not, because it never got enough sun to light the solar panels to turn on. So it really varies by time of year. You don't want to get stuck in two places. You don't want to get stuck in the what do they call it? the wind pattern that comes off the north. I can't think what they call
Polar
it.
vortex?
Yeah, the polar vortex. You don't want to get stuck in the polar vortex, and you don't want to get stuck down here around the equator. The interesting thing about the equator is that the density of the atmosphere varies. It's more dense at the equator and less dense at the poles. And so I see, I might have said that backwards. I see a much greater altitude when I'm at the equator than I see when I'm at the poles. So I'll be down here. In fact, some of this, yesterday it was at 14,500 kilometers, or 14,500 meters, which is the highest I've ever seen it. It tends to be about 14,300 meters is where, when it's in relatively warm environments is where it hovers.
Well, that's the worst thunderstorms in the world down in that area.
Exactly. The equator, it's very typical for those storms to get 50,000+ feet tall. So yeah.
What about airplanes? What you fly?
Yeah, so we always get the question, right, airplanes. What do you think about it, so I didn't tell you this. Okay, so that whole payload that's flying on that balloon, anybody want to wager guesses what it weighs? You know what this board weighs? It weighs a gram and a half. So what do you think the whole payload? Solar, supercap, tether, everything. Any guesses?
Under an ounce.
I can't do that ounce to grams conversion. So somebody give me a grams number.
25.
8. That's 2 antennas. That's 5 meters one way, 5 meters the other of 36 gauge magnet wire and everything else. 8 grams. And so if you think about it, if that got sucked in an airplane's engine, they never even know what happened. They just keep on going. What was that? I don't know. Plug must hit the window. I mean, literally, it would be nothing, a non-event.
So you don't have to notify FAA?
So you don't, on these you don't, and for 2 reasons. The balloon's less than 4 feet in diameter, and the payload weight is less than 4 pounds. So you pretty much can fly them. There are restrictions. You can't fly them, inside of an airport's terminal control area. Can't fly them inside of a 30-mile diameter outside of Atlanta Hartsfield. Can't. Nope, fire and forget. You need to see what the winds are going to do to you. One other thing about an airplane, the big thing, and one of the reasons why above 43,000 was so keen, yeah, you've got Learjets and some of the higher end private jets that can go up to the 50s, but most commercial aviation traffic, they keep below 43,000. Even across the ocean, they keep below 43,000. The fuel efficiency and everything else factors into that. But so getting above 43 was kind of a big deal because at 45, I'm not so worried about airplane traffic. Yeah, go ahead.
Adam, are you willing to share your presentation with us?
Yes. Yeah. It's just really big, and so we'll figure out what the right mechanism is. I have no issues with that at all. Yeah.
What's next on your upgrade list?
So I have a couple of battery chemistries that are rated for minus 40C. And what I found is that most of the time, manufacturers are conservative. They are saying minus 40, and I'm hoping I get minus 60. Because I'd like to see if I can get one to at least a couple times during the night to tell me where it is, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing I may actually accomplish, we'll see, I don't know. I wanted 1 million kilometers. I'm pretty close, about 100,000 kilometers short of 1 million on distance. And I wanted a year, and I'm less than 45 days away, knock on wood or whatever the jinx is. But we thought we were going to get there on Mary Ellen's. I really thought that one had the chance of making it. And when it went down, everybody's like, oh, it must have got a pinhole, because that's the problem. They don't burst. They worked themselves over time. And I tell you what, one of the really cool things is if it ever came down and landed in a part of the world that would be somewhat accessible, I would love to have somebody go get a recovery effort and send it to me, because I have no idea. If you think about the circuit board material, it's got a silk screen, a blue silk screen on it, but did the UV up there bleach it? I don't know. I'm flying all these naked, by the way. Everybody asks, what did you fly in? I flew them naked because these all started out as testing flights. I wanted to see just if the thing would work, and now I've got one that's gone almost a year. But yeah, so there's some really cool things. It's funny because it came down over Florida and kind of hung around in Florida, went back around Alabama and back across the southeast just like 3-4 weeks ago. I thought, I'd really like to see it go a year, but it'd be really cool if it descended somewhere and I could go find it, so. Yes.
I noticed that the average latitude is about 30 degrees. Why does it hang around?
I think that's primarily because of where I launched it from. I'm not 100% sure. If I was in Seattle, when I launched it? Would it tend to be in the more northern corridor? I don't know. And the only data point that I have around that is there are a lot of balloons that were launched out of the UK. The UK has a pretty big...
But what you said, the UK doesn't allow you to transmit.
Yes, and so here's the really interesting story about the UK. You can't use amateur radio, but they have an ISM band that's 434 megahertz. So, and that's license free, and they can't tell them what to do or what not to do. So they fly all their stuff on 434 megahertz when it's in the UK, and then they all switch to 2 meters when they're not meant to use it.
You need 20 meters.
Well, if you're using Whisper, yes, but if you're using APRS, they switch to 2.
But 2 meters doesn't have to.
Correct. So it would only be in areas where APRS would have coverage. There's only a handful of us that are flying Whisper, me and maybe 4 other guys.
You put your contact information on the equipment in case someone finds it?
Yes, usually I do, yeah. Yep. Hang on, I'll get to you.
And, well, I assume there's a community,
That's right.
I assume there's a community of you guys. Has any of you tried to recover anybody else's payloads
Yeah.
to do that examining?
Yeah, they do. There's a pretty strong community in the amateur, high altitude ballooning group, and if they get an opportunity, back in the early days when I first started launching them, for example, I had one that flew up over Kentucky in that area. I must have had 10 hams who sent me emails going, "We're going to go find it for you, and we're going to, send it back to you." I'm like, awesome. So, yeah.
I mean, it would just be cool if somebody could recover a payload, disassemble, take pictures,
Yep.
post it somewhere for
Yep.
everyone to see.
It happens. It does happen. Okay, back here.
What kind of spinoff do you see from this kind of work?
So here's what's really interesting is I have this guy within the last 2 months, I can't remember exactly, a PhD out of California, who sent me this email out of the blue. He's like, everybody's been looking for a calibrated reference for propagation. Now, it's not really calibrated in the strict sense of the word, but it is in another sense of the word. It's always 10 milliwatts. He knows exactly what kind of antenna I'm flying on. He knows exactly what pattern that antenna should be, and he always knows where in the world it is. And he wrote this big, huge paper about propagation theories on 20 meters using this balloon, and at the time there was 2 others that were up as well that he could cross-correlate on. And he actually said he was quite surprised at how consistent the results ended up being. So I think propagation studies, obviously the weather guys could use it for a little bit of in the past, but at least historical winds. I don't think anybody thought that the wind patterns were so dramatic that when you come through here, you do that. And when you come through here, you do that. And the other thing that happened was, you can see here's 1 crossing, here's 2 crossings, here's 3. This one has a chance. If it actually makes it over and stays over, it'll go that direction. And it has a chance, but we'll see. If it rides that little bit of a barrier. If it gets too far in, then it will go back this way. But it's pretty rare that you get one to cross over. So there's been some people that have talked about studies about wind patterns that cross, how the wind patterns work around crossing the equator. In all cases where it's crossed, it's been in completely dead air. I mean, they talk about the doldrums. That's the doldrums. Yeah. Guys who sail for, and deal with the equator, they talk about the doldrums. You're seeing it. That was the doldrums. That was 3 weeks. This one was pretty quick. This one's going to be probably close to 3 weeks.
Is anybody tracking that with, say, NASA or something like that?
No, not that I'm aware of. What's funny is I was on Twitter the other day, and I have kind of I won't say a big following, but a little following on Twitter. Out of the blue, I got this email, or this Twitter notice from this guy who had just gone to some conference of space people, and this was a big topic of conversation. I'm like, really? Keep them flying, we're using them. I'm like, what are you using them for? We just want to see what the winds are doing. I'm like, okay. So, yeah, it's kind of fake. Yeah, exactly. Here's my PayPal account, yeah. All right, well, anyway, thanks so much for your time. I'll get the presentation over to the people here. I've got a 2-page version that gives you just the highlights of if you want to do it yourself and what all the references are. And then I have an updated version of this with all of the latest dates and times and durations and all that stuff in it. It doesn't show up very good on this version of PowerPoint, so we used an old version that's easier to deal with. So, and it has all the links in it for these sites, so you can go and look. And the next time, you know, it gets over in the area, I usually try to get on most of the mailing lists and get people on Whisper to see if they can hear it. This one's flying under a friend of mine's call sign, K4JCW. So if you jumped on Whisper right now, you would see K4JCW and then reporting this 4-digit grid square for that part of the world. So thanks for your time.